It felt like my urine had been filled with tiny slivers of broken glass. The smell coming up from the toilet bowl was swampy and unpleasant, and I could see white stuff, pus, I guess, floating on the surface of the water. I took the towel off the rack and wiped my face with it. I was sweating, all right, it was pouring off me. I looked into the metal mirror and saw the flushed face of a man running a high fever looking back at me. "103? 104? Better not to know, maybe." I put the towel back on its bar, flushed the toilet, and walked slowly back across my office to the cell block door. I was afraid Bill Dodge or someone else might have come in and seen 3 prisoners with no attendants, but the place was empty. Wharton still lay unconscious on his bunk, Delacroix had fallen silent, and John Coffey had never made a single noise at all, I suddenly realized. Not a peep? Which was worrisome. I went down the mile and glanced into Coffey's cell, half expecting to discover he'd committed suicide in one of the 2 common death row ways, either hanging himself with his pants, or gnawing into his wrists. No such thing, it turned out. Coffey merely sat on the end of his bunk with his hands in his lap, the largest man I'd ever seen in my life, looking at me with his strange, wet eyes. "Cap'n?" he said. "What's up, big boy?" "I need to see you." "Ain't you looking right at me, John Coffey?" He said nothing to this, only went on studying me with his strange, leaky gaze. I sighed. "In a second, big boy." I looked over at Delacroix, who was standing at the bars of his cell. Mr. Jingles, his pet mouse, Delacroix would tell you he'd trained Mr. Jingles to do tricks, but us folks who worked on the Green Mile were pretty much unanimous in the opinion that Mr. Jingles had trained himself, was jumping restlessly back and forth from one of Del's outstretched hands to the other, like an acrobat doing leaps from platforms high above the center ring. His eyes were huge, his ears laid back against his sleek brown skull. I hadn't any doubt that the mouse was reacting to Delacroix's nerves. As I watched, he ran down Delacroix's pants leg and across the cell to where the brightly colored spool lay against one wall. He pushed the spool back to Delacroix's foot and then looked up at him eagerly, but the little Cajun took no notice of his friend, at least for the time being. What happened, boss? Delacroix asked. Who been hurt? Everything's Jake, I said. Our new boy came in like a lion, but now he's passed out like a lamb. All's well that ends well. It ain't over yet, Delacroix said, looking up the mile toward the cell where Wharton was jugged. Le mauvais, c'est vrai. Well, I said, don't let it get you down, Del. Nobody's going to make you play skip rope with him out in the yard. There was a creaking sound from behind me as Coffee got off his bunk. Boss Edgecombe? He said again. This time he sounded urgent. I need to talk to you. I turned to him, thinking, all right, no problem, talking was my business. All the time trying not to shiver, because the fever had turned cold, as they sometimes will. Except for my groin, which still felt as if it had been slit open, filled with hot coals, and then sewed back up again. So talk, John Coffey, I said, trying to keep my voice light and calm. For the first time since he'd come onto E Block, Coffey looked as though he was really here, really among us. The almost ceaseless trickle of tears from the corners of his eyes had ceased, at least for the time being, and I knew he was seeing what he was looking at, Mr. Paul Edgecombe, E Block's bull goose screw, and not some place he wished he could return to, and take back the terrible thing he'd done. No, he said. You got to come in here. Now, you know I can't do that, I said, still trying for the light tone, at least not right this minute. I'm on my own here for the time being, and you outweigh me by just about 1.5 tons. We've had us one hurrah this afternoon, and that's enough. So we'll just have us a chat through the bars, if it's all the same to you, and... Please. He was holding the bars so tightly that his knuckles were pale and his fingernails were white. His face was long with distress, those strange eyes sharp with some need I could not understand. I remember thinking that maybe I could have understood it if I hadn't been so sick, and knowing that would have given me a way of helping him through the rest of it. When you know what a man needs, you know the man, more often than not. Please, Boss Edgecombe?